So my talk is based on something that Robert Frost, the great American poet, once said. He said that we have to be at home in the metaphor. We have to know figurative values. And if we're not safe in the metaphor, we're not safe anywhere. We're not safe in science, and we're not safe in history. So I thought that was very interesting in this context. And what I wanted to get across was that metaphorical or figurative language is not just found in poetry or in literature, but it's found in the newspaper. It's found when people are writing a constitution, when they're drawing up contracts. It's found in ordinary speech in which one would conduct one's affairs. And so I wanted to bring them to deliver a kind of message about figurative language and how to understand it. And one thing that Frost says is that the only way to learn these skills with metaphor is to read poetry. And so I took them through a poem by Frost and talked about how you understand metaphor. And then we talked a little bit about how metaphor functions in what I called non-metaphorical environments. And for example, the front page of the New York Times, when I happened to look at it last week, I had many metaphors. It talked about window dressing in relation to Iraq. It talked about union in relationship to gay marriage in Utah. There was a mention of the metaphor melting pot to refer to Germany, the new Germany. And I wanted to talk to them about what those metaphors ask of us and how we understand them. Well, I wanted first to have them aware of how much figurative language, metaphor, they encounter on a daily basis. So I quoted actually from the Institute's homepage, which talked about sharing, for example, deep-seated values and reflecting upon values. Both of those are metaphors. So I wanted them just to be conscious that metaphor is all around us. That was the first thing. And then maybe a little bit more of a reach, I wanted them to actually take Frost's point, which is that you really aren't safe in metaphor. You don't know what's being done to you by metaphor or asked of you by metaphor unless you've had training. And the only training, the best training, is in reading poetry. So those were the two main points. And then I took them through a poem by Frost called Mowing, which has an elaborate, very difficult, compacted metaphor of mowing and how it resembles writing. And we interpreted it and thought about how it is that mowing is a good metaphor for writing, and also, importantly, how it isn't a good metaphor, because one thing Frost says is you have to know where a metaphor begins and ends, and you have to be able to ride it until it breaks down. So I wanted them to understand how metaphors work in some ways and in other ways don't. Well, one of the best comments that I got was quite arresting to me. A student talked about how metaphors can be reclaimed by groups. She used the example of the word dyke, which, of course, has been reclaimed by the lesbian community and is now an honorific and ennobling term. But for years, of course, was an insult, an offense. And what we figured out in talking about that phenomena where groups reclaim previously derogatory metaphors, what we figured out was that, in fact, when you make a metaphor, you have power in that moment. And it's not necessary to have power first. You don't have to have power to make a metaphor, because you can be disempowered, and by making a metaphor, in this case reclaiming one, in that act, you have power. So that was an insight that was given to me by one of the fellows, and it was terrific.